Okay, let's shift over into virtual instruments, software instruments, MIDI stuff in Reaper, and how to edit it, how to see all the information, particularly note and velocity. And then we'll get into some other routing and touch on the FX stuff a little bit more. So instead of just inserting a new track, which we were doing before, and we could drag an audio clip or record audio into it, now we can insert a virtual instrument on a new track. And that's what we'll do. And it asks us what we want. So this is a similar window to when we were adding effects like reverb, delay, all that stuff. But we want instruments here. And I have some other VST instruments that we'll talk about in a minute. By default, you should see just these ones by the company that makes Reaper. This is a sampler. The simplest one we'll look at right now is just the resynth. So let's grab that. And then it gives us some kind of default envelope, attack, decay, sustain, release. Wave shape by default is just a sine wave, but we can mix different types of waves that give it a different sound. To hear it, let's look at View Virtual MIDI Keyboards. This is kind of the easiest way if you don't have some other keyboard hooked up. And so by default, it will have its record arm button enabled here. That's how you can actually hear. If that is not on, then nothing happens. Because conceivably, I could have many different tracks with different instruments, and I don't want all of them to play if I'm hitting the keys, right? So you have to specify which one that you want to have record armed. Okay, cool. And this works with the computer keyboard also. If you hit the keys as it's written right here. So nothing too crazy with that. But let's try recording a little bit. Let's put this back. Okay, that's record enabled. Okay, stop. And when we do that, so we can see how MIDI is different. I'm going to go ahead because I have this empty spot. I'm going to just trim that a little bit, drag it over without that silent spot in the middle. So we can see that it's not an audio waveform that's generated. It's just these notes. Right? So I double click this and I can see the MIDI piano roll. So this is also a standard thing in pretty much every DAW. And you can see, here's the notes I hit. We can see which note it is. From here, we can like drag this around. I can stretch these longer or shorter as needed. If I wanted to, I could like do some quantizing things, which we can look at. We can like snap it to certain beats. So we have like lots of control here. Quantize. Yeah, this big key right here is what we're looking at. So use grid. We can. It's nice to have a little human touch that's a little bit off the beat, right? That adds a little warmth to it, but certain types of music makes more sense to like quantize so it's exactly on the grid. So quantizing, you can select right, like which type of grid you want to use there. I'll just leave it the way it is. So we see the notes here by using this virtual MIDI keyboard. The velocity of the notes is like maximized. So I can see this in the piano roll. I can kind of click this and drag it up and down, and that is actually changing the velocity of these, which is essentially like for like imagine a piano controller. The velocity is how hard you hit that key. So that enables you to have much more expressive control over the playing. So with this sort of virtual keyboard thing, it does not allow that. So it's all kind of flat, like kind of maximized. You can kind of go in and manually tweak the velocities. So actually, let's hear it now again. If I make these a little bit quieter. is louder. Beautiful. So let's look. Okay, so if you do have an external keyboard controller, like I have, so I was just like I was playing with you. I had this down here all along. This is it's called a Korg micro key. Korg has not paid me money to buzz market them, but this is pretty great. It's very affordable. This one is, I don't know, like $60. It's very portable. It's got, it's velocity sensitive. So as for like a entry level MIDI keyboard controller, it's fine. So if you have something like that, you can hook it up just via USB. And then we need to go into preferences to make sure that it is enabled. Sometimes the first time, so I can see right here, micro key 25, it's enabled. The first time something gets plugged in, potentially it could be listed as disabled. So in here you would kind of go in and I think you can right click. Yeah, there we go. Right click, enable, to make sure that is enabled. And once that's in, okay, great. I can just play it down here. So let's leave this track. And I'm going to create a new track. I'm just going to duplicate this one so it's got that instrument on it. I'm going to turn that one off. And I'll get rid of, just delete that. And we're going to have a new part here. But first, let's go in and let's look a little bit more at what's happening here. Okay. So volume tuning, we won't really touch. Attack, decay, sustain, release. This is a universal type of contours of the sound. This is called an envelope. We use this in even Touch Designer, in a trigger chop. It's basically doing this type of ADSR envelope. Once we get into VCV rack, that's going to be really, really important to know exactly what this does. But attack, we can think of this as the amount of time it takes for the sound once I hit the key to go from 0 up to maximum. So attack of 0 milliseconds, it's pretty much right away it goes to that peak. If I bring this up a little bit, so now it takes 400 milliseconds. You can hear that little slope. So our ears, it's very slow. So our ears our brain, I should say, is very adept at really telling the difference in the amount of milliseconds in all these stages. So decay is the amount of seconds, the amount of time it takes from the peak to go down to a plateau, which is the sustain. And then when you release the key, the release is the amount of time it takes from that sustained plateau down back to 0. So if sustain is at 0, that just would mean 100% of the peak value. So from attack to decay to sustain, there will be no drop down to a plateau. But sometimes if you do something like this, let's say, let's make this short. So you should hear the attack goes up to a peak, and then it decays 33 milliseconds to the plateau, which is at negative 22.6 decibels. And as long as I hold the key, it's going to stay there. When I release, it takes 234 milliseconds to go back to 0. So, this, you can have all kinds of different complex, it's like you're shaping the landscape here of the sound. Quick attack sounds have like this pluck sharpness to it. We could do something like, so if there's 0 attack, 0 release, and the sustained is up here, it's totally on. Release, it's totally off. So I can hear a little click there. So that's because it's at 0. Actually, we want like a tiny little amount so it doesn't click. So that's basically like straight wall up and then flat plateau at the top. Or we could have a little bit and then let's say a long release. So lots of fun you can have just by playing around with ADSR envelopes. Portamento is referring to gliding between notes. So if I let's say bring this up. So it's kind of, so I'm playing a C, and then I'm hitting, while I still hold the C, I'm holding the E. Switch over to the E. So instead of just playing the E automatically, portamento is gliding from those two notes to create a kind of whoop, a little sliding little glide. So wave shape, what we're hearing right now is just a sine wave. So it's a pure wave. Let's actually, you know what? Let's get into our, let's get our EQ back so we can see a little bit of the waveform. Or I should say the spectrum. Let's do this one. There we go. Beautiful. So we can see a sine wave should be just a single tone, a single frequency. But with this synth by default, there's a little extra harmonics like around it just to make it sound a little bit better. We can see it all the way down, and then up there's some other harmonics, but the fundamental is really in one little spot. As we shift these wave types around, we like bring up, so instead of just a sine wave, let's bring in a triangle wave. Right, so that's much kind of a tinnier sound. So there's the harmonics there. You can see that. So instead of just the sine wave, we've got all these harmonics that go up. So a triangle wave has a certain pattern of harmonics. Let's bring that down. Let's listen to Sawtooth. And you know what? Okay. That one's down. So I'm playing it, but I'm just bringing that down. So it's Sawtooth can be a little bit annoying. And we can kind of see how the wave is folded a little bit. So the different pattern of harmonics with the different waveforms creates lots of different types of sound. So Sawtooth, let's do square. We'll bring this back up. And so square sounds a little bit like Sawtooth, but it's got a little different spectrum there. But important thing in all cases, I'm just playing the middle C right now. The fundamental frequency, the fundamental tone remains right here. So middle C is something like 264 hertz. And so the different sounds, and this goes for people's voices, different musical instruments, the different sounds sound differently because of the distribution of harmonics that goes above that fundamental. So that's a little basic music theory for you. Bring that back up. Okay. So we can bring that down a little bit. Bring in an extra sine tone. Maybe if I do, I can actually. Oh, let's do this before I bring these other ones in. So extra sine. Actually, I'm sorry, I didn't mention also the pulse width. So a square wave, normally it's set like low and high is the shape of the wave, and pulse width is basically redistributing how much is low, how much is high, and that kind of changes the sound a little bit. So you get kind of gnarly effects by playing with that. Down here, we can throw in an extra sine wave, and if we detune it a little bit, if you remember, 50 cents is in each semitone. So from, let's say, E to F on a keyboard, that's 50 cents. But if I tune this other one, let's say not, let's do it like a little bit. Let's do like 10 cents. So just playing around with. it's not that cool. But you can play with kind of detuning that a little bit. Okay, so let's add another track. That one's good enough. But let's record another little part here. So up here, let's listen to that one more time. I want to hear what that was doing. Okay, so let's say that's like that's the happy part. This part down here, I'll make sure that's armed again. I want to make this a little bit more gnarly. Longer release, longer attack. Okay, that's fine, whatever. Okay, save all. Whoops, I accidentally did 2 takes there. Let's do it again. There we go. Why I did that before is because I have loop turned on right now, and I continued playing, and it started looping, and then when it does that, it automatically creates different takes, which can be kind of cool. Okay, this is terrible. So just don't judge me, but I'm just trying to show what's happening here. Let's click that, and let's try it again. Okay, I hate that portamento, so let's get rid of the portamento. And with the sawtooth wave, it's much louder than the other one. So let's bring this down right here. You know, we could play with the velocity and all that, and kind of move these around more if we wanted to. I'm satisfied with that. I think that's a masterpiece. I don't care what you say. It's a masterpiece. So now let's maybe look at if we had... Come back word. There you are. Some more effects. Here we go. So I showed previously how to add, all the things like reverb and EQ and all that. But now we can kind of look at the route options and what a bus track is. This is also a standard kind of universal thing that you do in a DAW quite often. And it starts to make sense once you have multiple tracks. So one secret for budding audio engineers and musicians is if you add reverb to something, it sounds way better. So if you are not a very good musician, you can throw a ton of reverb on it and it will sound better. So take that tip. Yeah, okay. That's also one way you could tell people are trying to hide something, but never mind. So let's add reverb to both of these tracks. The thing with reverb is, we could add to each one of these individually. Like I have the FX right here. I could add the reverb thing in the category right here. I could then do the same thing for my second track. The thing is, reverb is a very computationally expensive effect to do. If you start to have like many different tracks, if you're putting reverb on every single track, then you're going to blow up your CPU and things are going to crash. Also, the way our brain has evolved with reverb in actual physical spaces, we expect to hear just a single type of reverb environment. Certain sounds have like super long reverb and other songs are very dry. That could be a cool effect, but it sounds extremely jarring also. So what people tend to do is they add a effects, like an effects send track, and any of those tracks that you want to go into the reverb, you kind of just send it over to that one instance of the reverb plugin over here, and then it kind of comes back to the master. So you only have to control like the parameters of one reverb plugin, which is also much easier than if I had like reverb like all over the place. I had to kind of keep track of all the parameters. So let's do that. Let's add a new track, and on this track I'm going to add the reverb. Let's do categories, reverb, and do this again. Add reverb generator. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead. I talked about wet and dry before. So I'm going to bring dry all the way down, and I'll bring wet up, because if you're doing an effects send like this, the dry signal is already going to be coming from these two tracks. So from here, the dry signal is going to go to the master, and then a kind of copy of that signal is coming to this effects track. And I don't want any of the dry because it's already handled by the other two tracks. So I'm only adding the wet signal here, the reverb. The reverb wet signal is then going to go to the master. Okay, so let's do this. Let's route these. I've got this little route buttons at the bottom here. Click that, and I want to add new send. That's track 3 that I have. I haven't actually. You know what? Let me rename it. Let's just call it reverb. Add new send, reverb. So when I do that, the full signal, I mean, I can kind of change how much goes to that reverb track. I'm going to just send the entire signal over to that. And when I do that, you can see I've got this little yellow slash now also that shows me that it's not only going to the master, it's also going to some other auxiliary track. Do the same for this one, and I'll send all of it. Okay. And I don't know, let's see how it sounds. I mean, it doesn't sound great, but I do have some reverb happening here. Let's make it a little bit longer. Okay. I love it, even though it's not great. So that's why you might use like a route. So I'd say definitely it's useful to have some track with reverb at the end. EQ still kind of goes on each track because each kind of sound that's coming from the track tend to have like specific characteristics that you want to kind of shape a little bit. You could have a separate track with just a delay. That's also very common, and send a little bit to a delay and then go back to the master. But that's a good start for getting MIDI virtual instruments, I think.